Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this week's Inspiring Leadership podcast. I am absolutely delighted to have Sarah Bolt. Sarah is the CEO of Fourth, and I love its whole approach to well-being, helping people to help themselves, and what she calls it is scientifically human. The reason I came across Sarah as the CEO of Fourth is I actually have used their products. And I'm not sponsored by them. I have no personal commercial interest in them, but I just like when I find something that's really good and very useful. So Sarah, welcome. Great to have you on the Inspiring Leadership podcast.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me, and thanks for being a customer as well. That's always good.
Well, it's always nice to have two people from either side of the equation talk about it. And the reason, Sarah, that I wanted you on is I do, want to champion female entrepreneurs like yourself. And I think home is in the Bristol area. Is that right? I
It
think
is, yeah.
you've been doing
Yeah.
some mentoring and helping of other female entrepreneurs. And I think we need to champion female entrepreneurs around the world. I mean, this is listened to in 130 different countries. You'll be listened to. But in the UK, you were telling me a rather shocking statistic that less than 2,000 people raised over £1 million as female entrepreneurs in the UK. And we need more help in getting these businesses off the ground, don't we? Am I right in that statistic?
You are right. It is a shocking statistic, yeah, that only 2,000 women have raised over £1 million, which is nothing, in the VC kind of investment world. And there's more awareness of this now, and there's more work that has been being done. And but some of the basic realities is a lot of the investment teams within VCs are actually all men. And so if you're a female founded company, especially if you're talking about female health as well, the connection's often not there.
Yeah. Well, let's go straight into start talking about the business that you founded. What is Fourth, F-O-R-T-H, Fourth, and you call it Fourth with Life on your website. But why did you find it? And this is back, I suppose, to meaning and purpose, which we're going to talk about later. But what made you start to found something like this, and what does it do for people who are out there and they go, "Do I need this? What does it do?" Just explain a bit, the why and the what.
Yeah. So I launched the service back in 2016. So that was the first launch of the business. The idea for the business I had actually back in 2013, and took a few years thinking about shouldn't I, can I do this? But the idea for it really came from the emergence of wearables onto the market back in the kind of the 2011, 2012 period of time. And I love data. I'm a data geek. I absolutely love it. And I had a Fitbit when they first launched in the UK. Loved the data that it was giving me. And pedometers, which is what it really was at the time, is not new, but they really did it for a digitized world and a digitized audience and consuming data the way that you wanted to consume it. And so I love that. But at the same time, I wanted more data about my own body. And I wanted more deeper insights about my biological makeup. And there was just nowhere I could go to get it. You could go to your GP to get it because they would only test if you were sick. And even if you got test results from them, you really didn't really get given them. You were just phoned up and said, "Oh no, everything's fine. You're in the normal range." So you never got access to the information. So my idea was, well, I want to start a company that gives you access, allows you to be able to take a test to assess your biological makeup as a person, and then be able to access those results and understand those results through a digital format. So that was the fundamental idea, and that was the idea back in 2013. It took a while to get it off the ground because the sector was totally new. And when I started talking to investors, and it was angel investors at that time, because VCs didn't. It's only recently that VCs have actually started investment at a seed level. Prior to the last couple of years, it's really been down to angel investors to lead the charge in very early startups. But when I talked to investors, they were like, "But there's no companies like that offering that kind of service. So how do we know it actually there a market exists for it?" So it was very new. And I think now with today's lens, you look at it and you think, well, actually home testing, isn't that obvious? Well, actually, it wasn't obvious 10 years ago, because these companies like Forth didn't exist. So we set up the service in 2016, and I invited someone I knew who was a CTO to come and join me and build the company with me. So basically what we do, we offer people the ability to collect small blood samples at home through a finger prick. They send it back to us, and we have a number of partner labs, and one of our main partner labs in the UK is actually the NHS. And they give us the results, and we have technology which then converts those results into meaningful information, which then people can access within the app about their body. We're not a diagnostic company, we're really about prevention. So my interest is really about people self-advocating for their own health, understanding their own health so they can remain healthy, so they can feel the best they can be on a daily basis, but also kind of they can age well and kind of enjoy a quality of life well into their older years.
Yeah, and it fitted beautifully to my whole mindset, which people who've listened over the last, well, I think we've done about now 325 episodes, but over the last 4 years, and certainly from the start of the pandemic, that health and wellness and fitness is a really key part of the work that my wife Lee and I do with Inspiring Leaders. And indeed, I now am getting a number of the CEOs I coach to come and spend time with me in the gym, either the personal trainer Zach George, who's known as Steele on the BBC program Gladiators. He comes and he's trained a couple of my CEOs with me, and the pair of us end up dripping with sweat after working on the multi-gym. But I'm finding that the leaders that Lee and I are working with are really interested in, as you say, being able to self-advocate and have their own data. And move from that place with your results are fine. No, I want to see my results. And what I loved with using your service was, as you say, you could do the blood test at home. I went on further, having done that one recently, just within the last 2 months. Lee and I used one of your CTC tests, which is circulating tumor cells, because we wanted to be able to have the results of 70 different types of cancer you could have from the main organs, but prostate and breast and liver and so on, to get an early warning sign.
Yes.
With having lost my brother David, who died of metastatic cancer within 10 weeks because no one had identified him for at least 2 years, my other brother Graham, the surgeon, said. And every time he kept saying to his doctor he wasn't feeling too good or this was hurting, they kept saying, it's just because of your COVID injection. Don't worry, it'll go away. And if only somebody had done one of your Forth tests on him in those early months when he was complaining of things, they would have identified it early enough and been able to do something about it. But it had gone nuclear. It had gone metastatic, gone everywhere, into his back, his brain, his legs. It was just horrendous. He had to have vertebrae removed. He had to have his leg pinned. He had to have radiation into his brain. It was just horrendous. And then he really, the only option was palliative care at home, where he died. And so the work you do, it isn't just a nice to have. It to get this early warning, to remain as healthy. I want my health span to match my lifespan. I've seen, sadly, with our mother-in-law, who lived with us for the last 3 years of her life, that her health span had ended long before her life did. She had heart disease, lung disease, Alzheimer's, cancer, and various things that were all going downhill. But if she'd only done some blood markers many years earlier, she could have perhaps started to do something about it. I don't know whether those personal stories from me, Sarah, help perhaps you draw out some lessons of what you find helps the people you care about, who are your customers. Tell me any thoughts.
Most definitely. I think there's two very distinct sectors here. There's sickness care and there's wellness care, or preventative care, and we are very much in the preventative care mode. And we're all very unique as people, and our biology is all very unique. But if we're collecting this data about our bodies, we can get this early warning sign as you talk about, and it's an early warning sign that actually if you went to have a test at your GP, they might not pick up on the change, but because you've got your historical data and you know what your version of normal is, you can tell that actually there's something going on here which I could actually pick up early. So it's all about that early warning system for people as well, and be able to age well. So we're doing all that we can with that, and we get some fantastic stories, from our customers as well, that something has been picked up. We get stories like saying, "Oh, you've saved my life, this got picked up, but it wouldn't have unless I actually took my own initiative and came and did this test with you." So I think that I really believe the work that we're doing is really important, because as well with healthcare systems around the world, we all know this change in our demographic population is putting untold pressures on our healthcare system. I was looking at some figures just the other day, which shows that between now and 2040, the increase in demand for diabetes 2 services is going to go up by 34%.
Wow.
Now, and that was the same kind of an increase across a whole host of conditions. Now, if you think what's happened to our NHS service now, the pressure they're under, how large waiting lists have increased, and you think that added pressure, that's going to be building and building and building. And I was discussing it actually with our head clinician, and he was telling me that apparently around 2040 is the cliff edge, is where it's seen to be it's at its highest, and then the pressure will start to drop down, and that's due to our aging populations.
Yeah, and that's something actually you just mentioned there. I wanted to draw out. It was Tom Phillips, who's I think he's your head of clinical.
Mm-hmm.
I and my wife had a lovely chat with Tom before we took the circulating tumor cells test, because it's a big thing. I mean, if you get a result which says you may have something, you can do something with it. And he was very sensitive about the fact that, look, if it's all clear and it's negative, we'll just send you a note through and you'll be fine. But actually, if it's positive, we're not going to actually get in touch with you, and we'll get in touch with you personally and have a call with you on a Friday when you can do nothing about it. We wanted to talk to you in the early part of the week, and then we've got places, oncology departments that that we know that you can talk to. You can use whatever you want, but just so you don't feel bereft and on your own when you suddenly get a negative result. Of course, you then have to discuss it with your GP and things like that. So I love the way that you have this team of clinicians who are all themselves GPs and doctors who work with you. Tell me a bit about how you've gathered such a team with you that give that credibility with all that medical backup to the data and the whole the app and the online information that you provided me.
Yeah, so first thing is I'm not a clinician. I came from I was a strategy planner within healthcare, and actually a behavior change specialist. That was my background of how I came into healthcare and how I came to start this business, from a passion of trying to look at how can we change people's behaviors so that actually they'll be healthier. So, that is one of the things. I'm going off on a tangent here. I'll come back in a second, but
We'll talk about behavior change in a minute. But
yeah, so
we're talking
we'll
about
come back
your
to behavior
specialists.
change. So in terms of our specialists, obviously it's therefore just in terms of our duty of care, we have to have specialists involved in our whole triage process. So when we get results come into our system, every result we have is supervised by a clinician, and we will have clinicians with different specialisms as well. So we'll have a lot will work in a general GP environment, and that gives them a good overview, but it also gives them good empathy I think, with dealing with people. And then we'll have doctors as well who will be more specialist in certain areas. So whether that be they've got a particular interest in menopause, in hormones and endocrinology as a whole, or even in sports science. We have customers come to us who are doing a lot of exercise, and that's a totally different interpretation that you'd feed back to them other from someone who's interested in general well-being.
Yeah, and just really picking up on that, Tom, your head of clinicians, lovely level of emotional and social intelligence, and with a brother, as I mentioned, who was the president of British Plastic Surgeons. His challenge has always been with his fellow surgeons and the super bright doctors that he had, to make sure they develop their EQ along with their IQ. Because it's all well and good to spout out all sorts of lots of data and be terribly knowledgeable in your subject matter, but how can you really relate and connect with people who are going through a very difficult one? So that was great to see, and that was one of the things that made me draw towards Forth and what the work that you're doing. But also, I think it is an interesting aspect of the fact that a lot of the people listening to this, like me, love to keep fit and healthy. I mean, I'm training in the gym, 4 sessions a week, and a personal training session as well, maybe, and then a 5K run as well, doing some meditation, eating clean food, and avoiding supplements, which we'll come back to talk about supplements later on. You and I were chatting about that. So I think there's a lot of the people who are listening to this are very busy leaders, CEOs, many of them, military, special forces, explorers, athletes, Olympians. And they are really keen to know their biomarkers and what's going on. And as you say, to have this snapshot in time as time goes on, how are they compared to how they were before? Because everybody, as you said, is unique. And what is unusual in your markers is going to be interesting. And then the other point, coming back to your training in behavior change, I think this is a fascinating aspect. We're looking at Wegovy now. I might be having a conversation with the firm. Their VP's got in touch. He wants to be on the podcast to talk about their products and things like that. But we need to go upstream and solve the problem with the food industry and the fact that we've got, 65% of people's shopping baskets ultra-processed food. And that is what's killing people or making them very sick. And if you look back in the 50s, we didn't have that. And we didn't have all the obesity and the diabetes and the health problems that we've got. So there's almost like a crisis that's going on right now. And you're part of trying to give us an early warning of it. But also, we do need to change people's behavior. I mean, there's a lot in there, Sarah. I don't know what you want to unpack.
We do, and it's, behavior change is hard, and it's difficult. I mean, if you think of just how much the NHS has spent on smoking campaigns and trying to drive down that, and you think how long it's taken to drive that down, those behaviors on that to where it is now, but then we see an increase now coming up in vaping. So it's hard, getting people to change behaviors. But one of the things, in the kind of psychology of behavior change, one of the key things in behavioral change is self-efficacy. So it is one of the important stepping stones to be able to get someone to change behaviors. So for us, allowing people access to this kind of information, which often people have never seen before about their own biology, educating them on what it means, it starts to empower people, and actually so they can actually see a real kind of almost tangible difference of a data set that they can actually aim towards. So when we look at our data, and we've got a lot of data now, so we have over 1 million biomarker results within our system. If we look at the things like HbA1c, which is the key marker for pre-diabetes, and if we look at that, if we look at the data between, okay, when people did their first test and how did they then do on the second test, we see 56% of people improving on that marker, test 1 to test 2. So you know, you think of how many kind of big media campaigns could have that margin of make that margin of difference between 1 and 2. So I mean, you could argue that, okay, are we dealing with an audience who is already engaged? And yes, I guess we are. And you know, the challenge is always how to reach those hard to reach audiences. But we have to start somewhere with this education, and with the getting across the notion of people that actually it's about you advocating for your own health. It's actually about you taking responsibility for your own health to in the well-being sector. I mean, if you're sick, you should be within doctors, seeing specialists within the NHS, but that you can't rely on them to take care of your day-to-day well-being. You have to be responsible for that yourself.
I think that's a fascinating area, and I feel very strongly about it. That someone who's taught myself over the years, partly due to my military upbringing and training, but also just I think it's a philosophy that, you know, at 62, if I want to remain fit and healthy, I've got to avoid sarcopenia and keep my muscles strong. Probably I've got to need to work on building muscle because it's deteriorating so much, and look after my health and my wellness of various things. Um, and so I do feel a lot of people go, it's not fair, it's the environment, it's all happening to me. Yeah, and we also have choice. You know, the one thing we do have choice over is what we decide. Now you'd say, oh, some people are very poor, they're living in food deserts, they have no choice, they have to eat Big Macs and Kentucky Fried Chickens and pizza, and so you know there's no choice for them. No, they always have choice. They can actually cook more cheaply if they wish, but I think people need to take ownership of their own health and their own situation. And if it's not good, they need to do something about it rather than just go, oh, well, everybody else is like that. And I think it's because something like 93% of Americans are metabolically unhealthy. And I don't think the Brits are much better. I think we're about 50 to 60%, but it's certainly going the American way. We're all having the standard American diet, SAD, SAD. But it was an interesting, your fourth test, which I had in 2021, was really helpful to me, because then when I had a moment where I had an episode where I collapsed over a dinner where I was away on holiday with my wife after overdoing things a bit, probably I think looking back, blood pressure dropped right down. I then found at that stage that my liver was inflamed. The test that we had in the hospital that I had to go to showed that my liver enzymes had gone, a thing called ALT, which people measure if anybody has to do this, was like abnormally high, probably about 4 to 5 times what it should be. Whereas when I had the fourth test, it was fine. So I knew that a year before it had been fine. And then we have done a series of blood tests and been looking in lots of examinations. I was about to have a liver biopsy, but we've managed to stop it because I took out all the supplements, and I'd got really carried away with listening to various podcasts and things and people pushing their own particular supplements. And oh, take this, and this is important for you. And you and I discussed that the one you probably need is vitamin D for definite, because we're living in a climate where we haven't got much sunshine if you're in the UK. But you can get your omega-3 from oily fish like sardines and salmon and things like that, which I now have in my diet. But the fact was that everything I was doing was very healthy. I had enough sleep. I was exercising a lot. I was walking the dogs, things like that. But because I've been taking a cocktail of different healthy supplements and protein powders and things, it was actually overloading my liver, which was damaged. It had what they call hepatitis, a generic term for liver inflammation. And within 6 weeks of stopping taking all that, my blood tests for my ALTs back down to normal, from 650 down to 36. That's just 6 weeks. So I think I don't know your thoughts, but there's two thoughts. One is be careful on this billion-dollar industry of supplements that everybody's pushing on you. And I'm always disappointed to see some of the great speakers on health and wellness and various doctors also pushing certain supplements that they're getting paid to push on their programs, which I then take because they seem to be very knowledgeable people, and ideas about longevity from NMN and resveratrol. But yet it's not been properly tested. It has been on rats, but not really properly tested on humans. I don't know what your view is on, be wearing the supplement industry, but also just these frequent blood checks.
I think, I mean, the supplements, the healthy snacks industry, it's exploded. It's absolutely exploded, protein powders, protein bars, you go into any supermarket, any petrol station, any, news agent now, and you see the whole lot of, protein bars, have a nut snack, supplements, you see gummy supplements and all sorts of things. And the reality is, some of it is actually what is sold as healthy is not healthy for your body.
No.
So you do have to be really aware of what you're putting into your body. So interestingly, today I was looking at a gummy vitamin company, and they had a quiz, fill out this quiz and we'll tell you, kind of make a bespoke gummy for you, vitamin gummy for you. And it was curiosity I was doing it for, just to see what it would come out as. And I did it, and then it had, this is your bespoke gummy for you that we will manufacture for you. And I clicked on the list of ingredients, and it had 16 ingredients in this gummy, and half of them were ultra processed foods. So you have to be aware of what you're putting in your body, because perception is not reality. In the health and well-being world, because it's such a huge industry now, and there's so much money involved in it. So you do have to be very careful. We spoke about vitamin D. I can say, certainly if you live in a country like the UK that doesn't have great sunshine, you will need a vitamin D supplement. We know from our figures and analysis of our figures that vitamin D levels are lowest, get to about the lowest point around March, and then they start picking up a bit. So during those winter months, until we get a decent levels of sunshine in the UK, you definitely should be supplementing with a vitamin D. And we, again, looking at analysis of our database, we have huge swathes of our customers who are low in vitamin D. And it's such an important vitamin because it affects so much of your body. You'll then also have vegetarians or people who are following a vegan diet, who will struggle with B12. So sometimes they will take supplements. And in fact, I was speaking to a very well informed woman the other night who actually works for a kind of global activity tracking company, and she was a vegetarian. She said, "Oh, I have B12 injections." So she was well informed and up on that. But the other things that we see, and when we analyze our data, we're unveiling more and more information, really, and that is ferritin, or which is known as stored iron, and how the difference is between the sexes between that. So
and what is the difference? What is the difference?
So we've just introduced a new scoring mechanism, which takes different components and different biomarkers, and rather than giving you a lab range, well, it gives you a lab range, but it then converts that into a score out of 100, which is easier for people to understand. And the average for women was, I think, 59, and men were in the 80s. And then, we've got a lot of data. As I say, we collect a lot of data on people as well, so we're able to analyze our data sets. And then if we filter down more into that as well, between women who have regular menstrual cycles and those who are not, it's lower. So ferritin, iron for women who are having natural and regular menstrual cycles, that could be something to think about, and think about supplements there as well.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting that you're getting this level of granularity, and you're seeing in the trends. I mean, clearly people taking your test are generally better informed than the general population. They've probably got enough spare income that they'll invest in it. I mean, they're not massively expensive, your tests. I must say that I think it's very good value for money. But you will get the population skew with people who are keener on their health, and they are looking after it more. Despite that, I still think it's very interesting, the data you're getting. What other trends, as well as vitamin D, B12, ferritin, iron, that these are things that you've got to keep an eye out. What else are you spotting as you're starting to get in this wealth of data over the last few years?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, menopausal women, that's a big area for us, and just female hormones is a big area for us.
What would you
Um,
say? What are the standouts there?
well, we developed this product called MyForm, where we use AI and blood testing to then be able to map how a female's hormones moves over the course of their menstrual cycle. So we're looking at the four key reproductive hormones and how they work. We've been really particularly interested in perimenopause phase of life, because women have traditionally been very let down in that stage of life, and it's only really in the past 3 years that it's really starting to come to the fore, and you've got celebrities like Davina McCall really raising awareness of it. But some of the things that we're seeing in that is, using our tool, is that there's a lot of women who we would identify by looking at those four hormones that actually they're in the perimenopause, but because standard NHS testing and NICE guidance is only to test one hormone, FSH, they wouldn't be categorized as perimenopause. So we're really trying to uncover more and more insights through data analysis now, and really look at what insights can we look to drive kind of innovation within health, and added insights which can help really make a significant step forward on women's health.
I think it's so important, and clearly, it seems a bit strange for a male host of a podcast to be talking about this. It's only through the females in my life, and there's a number of them, that I've seen them go through it, whether it be perimenopause, menopause, or various different complexities over the cycle, the menstrual cycle. But I can just see how important it is, and how poorly served 50% of the population are with everything from endometriosis and things like that, which are just not talked about. And so there's a huge range of women's health issues, which are only now starting to get the kind of level of attention that they should have been having for years. And there's that report that's just come out about, as I'm looking at one of my daughters about to give birth to another grandchild, that our maternity care in the UK is quite shocking.
Great. Yeah.
It's shocking, and worse than it has been for many a year. So,
and the US is even worse as well. The
is
US
it?
stats on maternity care, yeah, it's
Yeah.
bad. But yeah, you're right. I think, and I've been obviously really looking at this area in terms of female health the last 5 years, and I kind of beating myself up as a little bit and thinking, as a woman, I thought I was a really strong feminist advocating for women, and actually I feel I've been kind of hoodwinked or blindfolded when it comes to women's health, because when you start to look at the stats that are coming out, and when you start to dig deeper into it, they're really, really bad. And you mentioned endometriosis. Well, the stat that is well known and published is it takes on average 7 to 8 years and 10 GP appointments for a woman to be diagnosed with
Correct.
endometriosis.
And
Yes, it will
one of our
affect
members of our family,
every 10.
had
Yes.
exactly that appalling treatment. 10 years before eventually an operation was done. But it's just not acceptable that people go through this.
And then you put that in the context that actually the prevalence is the same as diabetes 2. And you think how high profile and how much money goes into diabetes 2.
Yeah. No, I think, please keep championing, as you are doing, women's health and the tests that you do with my, I think you said it was called MyForm, the female hormone one test that you do, and to look at the stages of the cycle. I think it's extremely useful. I'm looking at you wearing your Apple Watch, and also have you got an Aura ring on?
I have indeed.
Yeah, and I've got my what is it, my Whoop strap.
Yeah,
so I've had an Aura ring. I've taken off my Apple Watch. I'm just wearing an old standard watch now, because I'm about to go and do an 11-day Vipassana Buddhist retreat in about 3 weeks' time. And during that time, I can't have any tech. So everything's going to go that's anything to do with technical watches and batteries, as I focus on actually understanding myself much better and managing my own emotions, which is going to be fascinating. But wearable tech is so really interesting. You love your data. I love my data. Even my wife, Lee, who's very technically savvy, she's quite interested in it too. What are you seeing as the benefits of, because many of my clients and the CEOs I work with and coach, they nearly all, if they hadn't, by the time I've finished coaching them, they're all wearing some form of wearable tech. What's your view on the benefits of it and perhaps where it might be a bit over-indexed?
I think it depends what you're using it for. You know, some people use it if they're training for a specific event. You know, things like Whoop, you know, might be used by people who have quite a high training regime. For me, I think for me, I use it more to make myself accountable.
Yeah.
You know, the data doesn't lie.
Yeah.
You know, where it tells me, you know, I've only actually walked 2,500 steps in a day, you know, I know that's not great. So I use it to make myself accountable. And it's another data point that changes a feeling into a stat, I guess. So it just helps to keep you on track, I think. And if you think you're not feeling very well, I mean, when I had COVID, and I've only had it once in 2020, my Aura ring told me something was wrong before I really knew something was wrong, because my temperature shot up and my readiness shot down. So again, it can kind of give you, I think, psychologically that reassurance that actually something's not quite right here. But yeah, accountability is definitely what I use it for.
Yeah, and having had a Whoop for about 3 years and then a Oura Ring for about two, and now had a Whoop for about a year and a half. There's really not much in them, but I found it very useful. The underpinning of all our health is sleep. And the leaders I'm working with, that old saying that we used to have in the military, I'll sleep when I'm dead, come on, sleep is for wimps and all that kind of rubbish that we were fed. And oh, it's good to train them and only get by on 2 hours sleep a night. No, you're worse than a drunk. And you're driving drunk when you were driving vehicles in that state, and it was very, very dangerous. And okay, of course, when you're in combat and things like that, and on some operations that I've been on, you had no choice. You had to be out doing there, and lives were at risk. And you were, if it was counterterrorism or what I was doing against the IRA. But there are many occasions when we've got people who are doing night shifts and things like that, who are on different cycles, and that in itself is, carcinogenic, and it's not healthy for people when they are on these shift patterns. But I just find, as you say, when I went to Germany to do an offsite with the CEO and his executive team. It was really enjoyable, very successful. But the flights and how it worked out, and traveling to the event, I got there just after midnight, and then I was up again at 6:30, and then we had a full day, and then they were all chatting and socializing in the bar. I don't drink anymore. I don't drink alcohol, but I was keeping them company. So I got to bed again about just after midnight. And then I was up at 6:30 for a run, 7.5 kilometers around the lake with the CEO. And then I got home again by 1 this morning. Now, that's the worst pattern I've had for many a day. And I can see it in many things. But what was interesting, I did a lot of meditation on my way back on the plane, and I could watch that on my Whoop strap, and I could record when I was meditating, and that allowed my body to recover. So I actually got a 72% recovery, even with 4.45 hours of sleep, which is not what I'd recommend to anybody, but I got quite a lot of deep sleep. So you can counterbalance some environmental situations with things like recovery, sleep. I have power naps every day. I'll have a power nap of about 35 minutes, probably be in the bed for about 45 minutes. Now, that's a luxury which many can't have, but if you can take it, take it. So I think it gives you that data, doesn't it? That you can start to live a life which will give you the longevity and a health span that matches your lifespan, rather than your health span ending, as many people does, 10 years before they actually die. they die before they die.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, rest is probably underrated as I guess, as medical advice, but it's so important, and sleep is so important. So, if you're looking at hormone balance take those. One of the things our doctors will recommend is make sure your sleep patterns are really good in the first place, and make sure you're having really good sleep hygiene, because those things they mess with your biology if you're
Yeah.
not giving your body enough sleep. I made the mistake the other night. I went to bed and it was about 11:15, and I thought, oh, I just look on LinkedIn, and of course I'm there with them for 45 minutes reading stories, and then I had a terrible night's sleep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely awful.
Screen time of TV or any of our phones are really bad beforehand. And one of the things I'm really looking forward to in the 11-day silent Vipassana Buddhist retreat is that the phone gets locked away. I'll have no social media, no television. It's just, 10-hour chunks, or 1-hour chunks, but 10 of them spread with meals. And again, it's going to be vegetarian. There won't be meat, because the Buddhists don't believe in killing sentient beings. So it's going to be very interesting for me doing that. That's my dog in the background barking at someone just gone by. So, but let's make this personal for you, Sarah. The leader you are today, here you are, successful entrepreneur, running Forth, and congratulations on that, as the CEO. What shaped you, just in a couple of minutes, your upbringing and how that shaped the leader you are today and some of the decisions you make?
Yeah, I mean, I think the people we are today, I think you are, you're formed by experience, but you're also, formed by your innate personality. Nature nurture is an interesting one. But you are a balance of both, I think. And I think as a child, I was always a very independent child, very focused, very driven as a child on what I was doing. But I was brought up in the countryside, lived on a farm. That's my dog now in the background.
Yep.
Uh, lived on the farm in the middle of nowhere. My parents owned a farm. They came from, my father came from a generations of farmers. So it's very different, I guess, to the life now I've built for myself. But I think one of the things, I'm the youngest of three. And my sister always tells me the youngest gets the easiest ride. I don't know if
I
that's
was the
true.
youngest of three. I think we do. To be honest, we
Yeah.
do.
But yeah, and I think, when I was 16, and this was in the 1980s, and my family had bought a farm about kind of 10 years previous to that, borrowed a lot of money to do that. And it in the 80s, anyone who's lived through it will know, or was present at all in that decade, was a time where interest rates went through the roof. We're complaining about interest rates now being like 5%. In the 1980s, they went at, I think they tipped 16% at one point. And my family basically lost their business, and we lost the business, and with the business was the home as well. So we lost the home with the business. So my parents, kind of in their mid to late 40s, they were back to ground zero in terms of their lives. So I think being an entrepreneur, you have to be a risk taker. You have to be. But it's all about manage risk. And from the time that I set up my business, I always said, I will never, ever put our family home at risk. I will never, ever be in a position that my kids would lose their home and their stable environment. And that's always kind of what I've lived up to within starting this business.
And I think that mixture of being an entrepreneur now, the upbringing that you had, and seeing your parents lose their home, and you having to go back living a very simple life where it was hand to mouth, it will stay with you forever. And I certainly know that in my particular case, I was 2.5, but when my father was killed and my mother had to bring 3 boys up on her own, age 33, she always struggled. There was never enough money, and
Mm,
therefore, mend it, do without, make do, or whatever. There was an old saying, wasn't there? But
mm,
basically, if we couldn't afford it, we wouldn't buy it. Whereas
mm.
now we've gone through a whole generation of we buy everything, and or we put it on credit, or you get a massive mortgage, and you want everything now. So I think there's some lessons there. Darkest moment in your life, and what did it teach you?
I think the darkest moments, I mean, you have hard moments in business, but darkest moment, if the business can't kind of collapse tomorrow, we'd be fine. I move on, that's life. But so I always really equate darkest moments more to do with personal loss.
Yeah.
And I know we've talked about this before because you've experienced, your own personal loss recently as well. And yeah, I had a very good close friend. I was best woman at her wedding, and she got to her late 40s and was diagnosed with triple negative breast cancer.
Wow.
Um, she had a 9-year-old daughter at the time, and we all thought, oh, you're going to get through this. But I was working in healthcare. I knew that, the statistics of the type she had was against her. And she got the all clear, but then 6 months later, it just spread throughout everything, and she died within 3 months of that. And it's hard losing people close to you, but when they're taken as well so early in their life, and leaving a child who's never going to see her mother grow up, it just makes you put life in perspective, isn't
It
it?
it it, it really
Every
does. But doesn't that come round to, I was going to talk to you about MQ and PQ. Let's go to PQ, meaning and purpose. Doesn't that give you a real sense of meaning and purpose for the work you did, for example, on the circulating tumor cells, the CTC test that you do? I think you call it True Check Intelli.
Mm.
Um, where if you could have, in your friend's case, identified that much earlier with one of those tests, how that might have saved her life. And you are
Absolutely.
saving people's lives, aren't you?
There's loads of great innovations happening in healthcare, but when I took the decision, I turned 40. I was actually working at Dyson as a product development manager. I turned 40, and it was one of those moments where I sat back and I looked. It's going to sound a bit cliched, but this is honestly comes from the heart. Well, I looked back and I said, what is really going to be my legacy? What are my kids going to say that their mum did? And it certainly wasn't going to be, I helped design vacuum cleaners. So I gave up my job. Kids were still young, but I gave up my job. I went back to university and I did a master's in behavior change because I decided I wanted to work in healthcare. So I did that. I wrote to NHS saying, look, I've got all these years skills as a kind of in marketing, as a strategy planner. I want to bring it to behavior change. I want to encourage people to change their health behaviors to be healthier. How can I help you with my skill set and bring a consumer marketing mindset into healthcare? Because it's all about motivation and psychology of behavior change. How can I do that? So I started working, doing some projects with the NHS, started working on some behavior change projects around different things, and then I became a healthcare strategy planner. But it was really, that purpose was, how can I do something that's going to impact people's lives? And that's what drove me to make that change, and that's what drove me to create the business, and continues to drive me to get up every day, even though some days you feel exhausted, to keep pushing forward.
And that's what marks out many of the inspiring leaders that I talk to. They have a real sense of meaning and purpose.
Yeah.
And the same time, on the moral quotient, you and I talked about the fact that it is a very fine balance, because when you're an entrepreneur, you do throw yourself in heart, body, and soul, but yet at the same time, you really care about your family. And
Mm-hmm.
I know it's been a dilemma for you. Do you want to just talk about how tough a call it is um, to yet give your all to a business that you're starting from the ground up, at the same time as what you do about two children that you and your partner have? Do you want to talk about the dilemmas?
Yeah, it is a dilemma. I think, I am one of these people who, my work and my job is very important. It is very important to me. I don't just do a job to make a living. I want to be making that difference. So the job is the job, and now the company is very important to me, and it is part of what defines me. But what defines me is that actually I'm a parent. I'm a mother. I've got two sons. And when I started the business, one was still in primary school, coming to the end of primary school. One had just gone to secondary school. And, and I think, if anyone says, well, do you have regrets about starting the business? I'd say no, not at all, about the business and the path it's taken. But sometimes I wish that those knocks on my study door, which said, Mum, can I talk to you? That I didn't say, no, I'm busy, quite so often.
Yeah.
Because you blink and you miss it, and you think when you first have kids, you think, oh my God, it's going to be years until you're always looking forward at the next stage, because balancing kids and work is really tricky. So you're always looking at, oh, well, when they're 3, I'll get some extra childcare provision. When they're 5, they'll be going to school and they'll have after club. When they're 11, they'll be going to secondary school and they'll be able to get the bus. So you're almost like wishing them to get to the next stage. And then suddenly the day comes that they leave for university, and it's hard.
It
I
is.
was terribly sad, terribly sad. My youngest son in September left for university to study law, and oh, I couldn't even talk to anyone about it, because I said, you can't talk to me about it because I'm probably going to start crying in front of you. And it's that, it's how quick it goes. It's over like that. Yes.
You're so right. How old are the two boys now?
So they are 19 and 21 now.
And you know what the statistics are? That by the age that they were 18, you had spent, sorry about my dog. You had spent 90% of the time you're going to spend with your sons by the time they were 18. 90%. And that's a shocker. I mean, my daughters are now 31 and 30.
Mm.
So it really made me want to go and spend more time with them. So I'm going to, there's a weekend coming up. I'm going to go down and see them both and spend the weekend staying with them. And particularly with one of my daughters about to have a child, and I'm going to be a grandfather. And then the time just dribble away through our fingers. Resilience was one of the topics that we were talking about. And I think you said your partner has done Ironman, and that as an entrepreneur, it's a bit like not a sprint at all, though the investors, I think you said, always expect you to sprint to everything, but it's more like a marathon, or indeed we discussed a triathlon or an Ironman, because there's transitions, and then it's a really long distance that you're going to have to go. Talk about resilience and how you've picked yourself up in times of adversity.
I think, as a founder, resilience is going to be your most important trait, because there's so many peaks and troughs within a business, and so many challenges that come at you constantly, and they'll come at you at a side angle when you weren't even expecting it. So resilience is really, really key. You have to be able to put your mind and, to absolutely anything, because you're doing different things, every day. And I think throughout a lot of my career, although I worked at some big companies, I really liked working for those small companies, because you had the opportunity to turn your hand to so many things and get a voice in so many conversations, which you don't get in big corporate companies. And actually, we have a policy in our company that we don't hire people from corporates, because they don't do well in kind of small startup, businesses at all.
Yeah.
So resilience is absolutely key, and it will be one of your biggest strength as a founder. And if you don't think you're resilient, then don't start a business.
What very wise words. Well, we're into the final couple of minutes. So, and this has been fascinating. I could have chatted to you on so many topics, on so many. Couple of books that you and I discussed that I'd love you to share with everybody listening, and then I'll get you to go into the 2-minute top tip. We'll do that next. But what are the books you'd recommend, and why would you recommend them?
So I tend to listen to audiobooks now, and one of the reasons for that is I spend so much time staring at a screen. I like to give my eyes a break. So I'll you'll have seen behind me there's a dog, so I'll take the dog walk, I'll be listening to an audiobook, or if I'm driving to meetings, I'll be listening to audiobooks. So two books that I've been really inspired by and really engaged by more recently are Ultra Processed People. Really fascinating read. This term ultra processed is really coming into conversation now, being talked about, how this mass food kind of production, the mass production of food, how that's actually changing kind of our health, really, because it's become so ultra processed. And it's absolutely fascinating. I mentioned earlier on about that gummy that I looked at, and half their ingredients were ultra processed.
Yeah.
So you do have to be really careful, but that's a really big eye opener about the food industry and how the mass manufacture of food and trying to bring down the food costs is actually now having a really adverse effect on our health. So I really recommend people read that. The book that was really riveted by was a book called Invisible Women. It's been in the top 10 for a while. I think it's dropped out now because it was released a few years ago now. But it's really about how the whole world has actually been designed for men.
Yep.
And from width to pavements, which actually don't fit a kind of pushchair width. It's just so many little things that you don't actually think about. And if you read that book, you're like, wow, have I been going through life blindfolded, that I've been unaware that all these things have actually been designed that way.
Well, I'm going to go and listen to it. I'm going to download it and I'm going to listen to it. So, Sarah, would you next, as the final bit, and I'll wrap up with my thanks. Introduce yourself, say who you are, the role that you're CEO in, what, in a nutshell, what the business does, and then your top leadership tip, please.
Yeah, so I'm Sarah Bolt. I'm the CEO and founder of Fourth. We are a preventative healthcare company, and we give people insight into their inside health by allowing them to access home testing and converting that lab analyzed data into an understanding of their health and tips for how they can improve.
Fantastic. Your tip.
My tip. So my top tip, and this is something that happened to me this week, which really brought it home, was about, we just talked about resilience. In order to have resilience, you need to have energy boosts. You need to look for those energy boosts constantly, as a founder. And the way I found kind of really strongly hit home this week was reconnecting to the reason that you should started this journey in the first place. So I started this journey to make an impact on people's health and in people's lives. I think sometimes that gets lost because as a founder, you're so engrossed in the business, You're answerable to your shareholders. You're doing investment meetings, which is all focused on growth data, what you're going to do, X, Y, and Z. And you get drawn away from actually what your purpose was in the first place. And this week I was invited to an event called Pint of Science, which aims to bring scientific topics into the local communities. I presented in a pub about AI and hormone mapping, and it was just incredible. Myself and our Tom, our head clinician, did the talk. We got a rousing round of applause, and we came out absolutely buzzing and absolutely invigorated to continue on our mission. So it's that reconnecting with your purpose is so important.
Well, Sarah, thank you. And I'm certain that it was a very good call to ask you to come on the Inspiring Leadership podcast. You certainly inspired me, and I'm sure you will be inspiring people around the world. But in this preventative healthcare calling that you have, a sense of vision and purpose to make a difference, you made a difference to me and to my wife, and I know you've made a difference to a lot of people. So thank you very much for being on the podcast. And people listening, please share this, let other people hear about the work that Sarah and her clinicians are doing at Forth, and also get them to listen to the other inspiring leaders who we're lucky enough to have as guests on this podcast, and write your reviews and like it if you do like it. So thank you, Sarah. It's been fantastic having you with us.
Thank you. Thank you for your enthusiasm.